Today, we are going to talk about anthropology, ethnographic research and documentary filmmaking. To start with, let us know what is anthropology. Anthropology is a very well defined and a popular means of education. It is in-depth understanding of human beings and their proceedings. It talks about the ancestors through evolution of time and space, and in relation to their physical character, environmental understanding, social correlations and the surrounding culture. Today we are going to talk about how ethnographic research can be done with the help of documentary filmmaking. But before we go into that, we need to know what is research all about. Research is basically a very creative and systematic work undertaken to increase the stock of knowledge. Research can be done in several ways. There are many ways through which the research design is developed. One of that is ethnographic research. Ethnographic research over the time has become very significant and very popular. It is known to be the branch of anthropology that involves analyzing and understanding of how people are actually living their lives. Unlike many conventional researchers who are practical and specific with their queries, anthropological researchers build a third-person perspective by visiting their consumers in the comfort of their homes or offices to closely be able to observe and listen to them, but in a non-directed way. So, anthropology research is basically, rather than studying from outside, you learn it from the inside people. Now, let us see what is ethnography. Ethnography is very important, and as I already said, it is a very important part of anthropology. This research enquiry in ethnography relies a lot on observational skills. The researcher camouflages with the setting and the people who are being studied. When documenting them in personalized form, their social interactions and the participants' opinion, just to understand this in their comfortable and ongoing local context. It originated from anthropology in the early 20th century and also spread to other social science disciplines, mainly sociology in that century. Now, ethnography kind of research design is used in almost all different streams in other educational studies as well. One way to conduct qualitative research is the ethnographic method. Its historical disciplinary origin definitely lies in anthropology. Ethnography mostly revolves around the understanding of culture of a subject group or group of individuals. This mostly happens when researchers do the research by becoming a part of the subject group. Ethnography is used by diversified form of social sciences. Understandability of usability, user-centered design and service design. Ethnography used to support a designer's deeper understanding of the design problem. The main aim of this ethnographic research is to understand the people by being a part of them. So, here the researcher is not looking to the fact as an outsider, rather they are staying inside and then they are trying to bring out what is there. In advertising, in filmmaking, in various other forms of mass communication and media, this kind of research is very popular. So, let us say if you want to make an advertisement on the rural life of people, what they are doing is they are going to the rural India, they are staying with the people for days, trying to understand their likings and dislikings, and then they come out, and when they come out with a proper research about what they want to do and how they want to do, and based on that then they designs their creativity. Anthropology as a discipline has evolved over time. It is not a very new discipline. In the late 19th century, anthropology used to talk about the primitive cultures. Then in 1920s and 50s, it used to give more emphasis on observation, interviews and case studies. And slowly from the 50s and 80s, it came into the classrooms. It was used for research purpose. So, something which we are discussing today is not very new. It was always there, it used to exist there. Now, let us see what are the steps that we need to follow while doing the ethnographic research. Now, let us see the steps needed to be followed while doing the ethnographic research. The first one is selection. The ethnographic method begins with the selection of a particular culture. The researcher selects the culture or the community at the beginning. That is the first step while doing this ethnographic research. The second one is literature review. So, the researcher reviews the secondary literature pertaining to the culture to get an idea about the culture that they have selected for the study. The third one is basically identifying variables. So, the researcher identifies variables which are interesting for him or her as well as for the people. The next one is entry. In this stage, the researcher tries to become a part of the culture. Then comes the cultural immersion. So, researchers start living in the culture for months or even years which they have chosen to study. You know, it's very difficult to understand the culture and the lifestyle of a people unless you are staying with them. So, here the researcher stays with them for a long period of time to understand how the culture has developed, and then comes the data collection process. So, in the data collection process, the researcher talks to the respondents, collects information through observations, interviews and documents. Then they try to develop a theory. So, these are the various steps that a researcher need to follow while doing the ethnographic research. Now, let us see what are the merits and the demerits of ethnographic research. To start with, the merits of ethnographic research. Ethnographic research is very crucial for identifying and analyzing issues which are unknown to us. The researcher must know to develop a theoretical framework based on which the entire research will work. A detailed description is given in ethnographic research, so whoever is reading the final analysis will have an in-depth knowledge about the subject. Thinking, feeling, sensation, perception, intuition, understanding, analysis, organizing, comparing, classification, all are involved in ethnographic research. So, you can have a better understanding of the particular culture or of the particular thing on which the research is done. The subject matter of critical ethnographic research is largely the tribal community, and the primitive tribes are mostly marginalized, and so when you are working on them, when you are trying to develop a theory on them, it is very important that you stay with them, you try to get the ideas and data, and then you can build a research on that. So, the most important merits of ethnographic research is, after the research is completed, we get a full, proper, in-depth analysis of a particular situation. Now, since it has some merits, so it has to have some demerits as well. The first is, it is a very time consuming process. It takes long time for the researcher to get over. And next is, it is very subjective. The data that you are collecting, it's very subjective in nature. So, the researcher needs to be very, very unbiased in whatever they are doing, and they have to keep a proper record of the entire activity that they have done. It is very sensitive in nature, and it requires a long involvement from the researcher. It is a very expensive process, because you understand that when you are doing a research for a long period of time, you are staying in a place for a long period of time, it takes a lot of money, and it is definitely a very expensive process in that way. It does not involve cause and effect relationship. It is not judged based on the statistics, it is not a quantitative techniques, rather it is a qualitative technique, so it is very subjective in nature. So, since it is very subjective in nature, so there is very, very less scope of the hypothesis getting tested. That is one of the reason why the researcher needs to be very, very particular about the process of data that they are collected, how they are going to keep the record, how they are going to keep the track about it. So, ethnographic research needs to be developed and it needs to be conducted with a lot of care. Now, when doing such a sensitive research, the researcher needs to have certain skills. The skills are very important. The ethnographic study requires a variety of skills which I am listing and I am discussing briefly. First is high degree of interpretative understanding. You need to be very well interactive and interpretation has to be very well done. The researcher needs to be unbiased while presenting the viewpoints. You can be a part of this entire activity as a researcher, but you should not put your views. Whatever you have collected as data, that needs to be reported completely objectively. The researcher needs to be comfortable and needs to get familiar with the social settings. They need to understand the language, the culture, the lifestyle of the people with whom he or she is working. There has to have a huge requirement of good communication skills, because if you are not having a good communication skill, you will not be able to communicate with them, and also the researcher needs to be a good convincing power, because you have to understand that you are going and staying with different kind of people who belong to different sort of cultures, different language they speak. So, you need to convince them to get a proper data, otherwise you will not get proper information from them. The researcher need to understand and respect sensitivities surrounding the culture, values and norms of social settings in which the study is being conducted. So, you should be respectful not only towards the people, but also towards the culture, the language that they follows. Ethnographic research definitely can give a very good result, provided the researcher is doing this work very objectively. It is a subjective research, but the researcher has to be very, very objective in its activity. Now, let us see the characteristics of ethnographic research. The first most important characteristic of ethnographic research is it is very contextual in nature. The research is carried out in the context in which the subject lives and works. It is unobtrusive. The research avoids manipulating phenomena under the investigation. So, again I am saying that when we are doing ethnographic research, the researcher needs to be very objective. They are not supposed to do any sort of manipulation. It is longitudinally very long. It is very, very long. It takes a lot of time to finish the research. It is generally collaborative in nature, because you have to be in a good relationship with the stakeholders, with the people, with the respondents, because if the respondents are not cooperative, then you will not be able to do a proper research. Interpretative, the researcher carry out interpretative analysis of the data that it collects, and it is organic in nature. There is interaction between question, hypothesis and data collection and interpretation. So, all of these are very important characteristics of an ethnographic research. So, till now we were discussing what is ethnographic research, its merits, its demerits, its characteristics and all. And while discussing one thing, I was constantly saying that in ethnographic research, the data collection, rather the data is very important, because it is a data which actually will be able to tell us whether the ethnographic research will come out successfully or not. So, previously the ethnographic research used to depend a lot on the secondary data sources. So, the writings, the books and whatever available, and also they used to have a primary data source, that is they used to speak to the respondents. Now, the films and the documentaries are also used a lot as one of the major data source for doing ethnographic research. So, as I was discussing that documentary films played a major role in anthropology study and as well as in ethnographic research. In the mid-1950s, visual anthropologist Jean Roche started to experiment with improvised fiction in ethnographic films such as Jaguar 1967, Muy un Neuer which is 1958, and La Pyramid Human. Film critics would call these films an ethnofictions. After agreeing a story outline, the camera simply follows the subject, improvisations of their own and others, lived experiences, and the aim is to show aspects of ethnographic research otherwise hard to represent. So, what he used to do, after he used to choose a particular subject and the storyline, he used to just put the camera and then the things were getting recorded into it. So, this is wonderful experience of how ethnography, anthropology can be used in documentary filmmaking. As I was repeating from the beginning that when you are doing an ethnographic research, data is very important and the researcher should not be at all biased while reporting the data. That means the documentation needs to be authentic. So, when we are talking about authentic documentation, audiovisual documentations are one of the best to do that. So, these days documentary and films are used a lot to collect data for ethnographic research. Documentary would mean a presentation done expressing or dealing with factual events. Audiovisual formats of keeping documents are becoming very popular and acceptable in modern research activities. Documentary is intended to document real fact and figures, the reality of it all primarily for the purpose of instruction, education or maintaining a historical record. The documentary genre has radically evolved and been used in recent years for several research activities. Since it uses the medium to capture real people, real situations and real moments, hence it plays a very crucial role in research. Now, majority of the university has started accepting documentary also as a very important primary data source. Sometimes it is also used as a secondary data source. Previously, the data was collected from books and other written material, but now audiovisual materials are also gaining a lot of importance. Researchers are using documentaries to gather information. For example, if a researcher wants to get information about a particular place, their culture, their lifestyle, their food habits, they can very well use a documentary made on that particular place. And there are many documentaries which were made on the place and the culture. They record their activities using audiovisual medium, which definitely is a very authentic document. The anthropological study have received new dimension with the use of documentary. So, documentary filmmaking, as I have already discussed, has become one of the major source of collecting data. Why? Because when we are doing ethnographic study, we need to know about the people, about their lifestyles, about their cultures and what they are doing. So, in these things, audiovisual medium and documentary filmmaking are playing a very big role. Ethnographic research is dependent mostly on qualitative research. Strategically, it involves codependency on high quality research design. It is one of the research which is highly regarded in majority of the cases when we want to know about the human beings and their culture. It is the central point of focus is mostly groups for which this documentary plays a major role. Let us say I want to know about a particular place, about a particular region, about the culture of that place, about the region, documentary can very well give it to me. Many important filmmakers had made documentary on certain places. So, those documentary can definitely provide the researchers with an in-depth knowledge how the things are going there. Ethnographic research is, however, very beneficial with the understanding of cross-cultural analysis. It helps to study the behavioral experiences of the people. In this regard, I can say that the researcher is getting a lot of advantages by using documentary as one of the major data source in doing their research. In this lecture, I was mainly talking about ethnographic research. So, ethnographic research, as we have already discussed, is a research which is done to understand the lifestyles and the cultures of the human beings. So, here the data needs to be very authentic. The data needs to be properly analyzed and since the data is very subjective in nature, so the researcher also needs to document everything very objectively. So, in this regard, documentary is giving a very good advantage to the researchers, as documentaries are made with a lot of authenticity, and we know that in documentary people are able to hear and see things, so which makes it more authentic. So, it is helping the researcher to get a proper information. They are actually gaining a lot of information about the place, about the people, about the culture of the people, and overall, since it is accepted by the universities also, in the long run, documentary filmmaking is definitely going to help the ethnographic research design process, because documentary filmmaking at the end of the day are very authentic, and they actually give us a huge information about any locality on which they are made. So, the researcher who are interested for ethnographic research, you can very well use documentary as one of your major data source. Thank you.